so she has 4 skills. She's got Frenzied, Life Siphon, Increased Sensory, and Massacre. And this build is a RPM Massacre build. So it's designed to shoot as quickly as possible and to trigger her skill Massacre as much as possible. The Frenzied ability is her state, which increases her damage. It increases her bullet pen, so it allows her to shoot through lighter enemies and shields. And she also takes a little bit more damage while she's in her frenzy state, and incoming heals are also reduced by 50%. If you ever feel like you're kind of in danger and you're trying to kind of stall things out, you can turn off Frenzy at pretty much any time. It has almost no cooldown, but if you want to re-enter Frenzy, it'll cost you 10% of your max HP. Sometimes it's very much so worth to do this. If you're really low on HP, you need a lot of HP, you can quickly turn it off, pick up a few health packs from ads, and it'll heal you a lot more if you're outside of Frenzy rather than inside of Frenzy. And there's other reasons why you might want to exit Frenzy, which we'll talk about when we get to the other skills. Life Siphon is the second skill. This is mostly used for mobbing. It's not used for bossing all that much. Its cooldown is fair, but it uses 3 of the Power of Life resource, which is her custom resource. Power of Life is something that she just kind of passively gains as she's killing enemies. Every time you kill an enemy, there's a chance that a blood orb will drop, and then when you pick that up, it gives you a Power of Life gauge towards casting skills. And with the Life Siphon skill, depending on how many enemies are around you, if you're in your frenzy state, you can drain HP from them and deal a pretty sizable amount of damage. If you're outside of your frenzy state, then instead you can actually get quite a bit of DR. It's not really that good, and it's not used that much in bossing because there's not really ads for you to scale this off of. It maxes out at 10 stacks for the non-frenzied state, so imagine if you're fighting a boss, it's the only thing nearby, you're only going to get 1 stack, which is completely negligible. So for the most part, you could use this while you're mobbing, if you're not using another Descendant for that. But in bosses, it's not really used at all. It's kind of a waste of resources. Increased Sensory. This skill, very, very important. It's kind of the main driving force of our DPS. When you are in your frenzied state during the entire duration of it, you do not shoot from your ammo magazine. You shoot infinite ammo, and it won't take from your current clip. And so we are going to abuse this with the 4th skill Massacre and extend the duration of it as much as possible using modules that increase skill duration, which affect it. Outside of the frenzy state, if you cast this skill, what it'll do is it'll make you faster, and also when you kill enemies, there's a significantly higher chance they drop one of those blood orb things. It's actually called Life Sphere. What you can do before you get the class module that we use, Blood and Iron, what you can do is when you see an ad phase, you can turn off your frenzy, activate the skill, and then kill the mobs during it, and you'll have a much better odds of getting those 3 stacks of Power of Life so that you can use Massacre at the next good opportunity, since you are relying on killing those mobs. And this also costs HP in order to cast, and we'll have to factor that into how we combine it with the 4th skill. Massacre, this is what this build is actually based around. There's a couple of builds for floating around. This one is based off of attacking really quickly. And what this does is when you cast Massacre, it will replace your current gun with a special pistol. And this pistol takes all the same attributes as whatever gun you were holding when you cast a skill. So if you have an SMG, it becomes a pistol that shoots really fast. If you have a sniper rifle, it becomes an SMG that shoots really slow with powerful bullets. And what it does when you're frenzied is it will add a flat amount of extra damage for every bullet you fire. And you can see that it's the additional damage, skill power times this. And also you get additional skill power plus 10% for every 10% of your HP consumed. And so it adds a pretty sizable amount of extra damage whenever you're firing. So we're going to combine that with a super fast shooting gun and try and proc it as much as possible. Outside the frenzy state, it applies a pretty long stun, but we're pretty much never going to use that. This will consume all of your Power of Life and load that many bullets. But what we're going to do, because let's say you have 3 Power of Life, you load 3 bullets, 3 SMG bullets, that's going to go by in the blink of an eye. We combine it with increased sensory, and now you have these super empowered bullets and infinite ammo for the set amount of time that you see here. And so combining these two together creates a really high burst. Now, this doesn't have a duration listed, so once you actually load into Massacre, you stay in the Massacre state until you empty your magazine. And what this means is you can use increased sensory, shoot with infinite ammo, but then not shoot the bullets in your current clip. And since you don't shoot those bullets in the clip, Massacre doesn't go away and you stay in Massacre. Increased sensory does not take power of life in order to cast it. So since you're staying in Massacre, the next time increased sensory comes off of cooldown, you can just immediately cast it again and go directly into a burst right away. The last thing we're going to talk about is the class module, Blood and Iron. This module is not easy to get. It takes a long time to get it. It's a pretty decently common drop from the level 122 Colossus. That guy's name is Obstructor. And when you kill him, he can drop a Transcendent module. And then I think there's like 4 or so in his loot table. So it's got a pretty good chance of dropping in 10 kills. I dropped it like 3 times. And what this does is it makes it so those orbs that you get from killing enemies no longer appear, and instead you can get the Power of Life custom resource off of critical hits. It has an internal cooldown of 5 seconds, which can be reduced with the skill cooldown trait that you can get from a lot of places. And whenever you score a crit, there's a 30% chance that you just get one of your custom resource. So now, instead of having to kill ads and waiting for these ad phases in order to do your burst and build into Massacre, you can effectively just shoot the boss, which is increasing your uptime on it. And if you get unlucky, and the mobs don't drop those life orbs, then it doesn't matter because you can just shoot until you get it. It's still RNG based, but it's still way more reliable than killing ads. And we're going to use this as the main driving force of how we build Massacre and how we also abuse the windows of when we can build Frenzy, when we can avoid building Frenzy. Next, we're going to talk about the class mods. I'm going to talk about the essentials. You're going to see that as we go through the guns and as we go through the class mods, that I have everything Forma, but not everything is essential to Forma. There are a lot of things that are optional as add-ons later on. There's a lot of things that you could use at a lower level. So realistically, I get the question a lot, should I Forma my Descendant first or my weapon first? And what I would really recommend is that you Forma your weapon first once you've determined what you want to use on them. We'll go over weapon choices shortly afterwards, because the amount of mods that you need in order to maximize your damage is actually just a few things in here. And so even with a lightly Formad or not Formad at all Gley, you can get most of the damage from this build, if not almost all of it, in lieu of lowering some of your defensive traits a little bit, which tends to not be too much of a problem since we utilize a mod called HP Collector. So Blood and Iron, this is our class mod. Again, it drops from the 122 boss Obstructor. Your sub module, it does not matter what you pick here. It's all just flavor choice. Some of them have different knockdown and knockback capabilities, but for the most part, we just use the sub module because it increases the module capacity instead of decreases it. And this has been Formad, so it provides 15 instead of 10, a 50% increase. MP conversion provides us almost all of our skill cooldown, which reduces the internal cooldown for Blood and Iron in order to recover Power of Life, but it also brings all of our cooldowns, including increased sensory a little bit. In a group play activity, we try not to Massacre off cooldown because of issues related to frenzy buildup, and so having too much cooldown isn't super useful. So we're getting almost all of our skill cooldown, almost all of it, from just this one module alone. Battle of Stamina gives us a sizable amount of health. There are mods that give more, but this one also gives skill duration, which is important because this is what allows us to burst for as long as we possibly can. Increased defense gives us a large amount of defense, and there's a lot of people that ask about another mod called an Iron Will, a legendary mod that drops from the Echo Swamps. And the thing is, an Iron Will at max upgrade only provides 120% defense, which is pretty paltry compared to this blue increased defense is 160. So this is a lot more powerful. And if you're wondering why, it's because they can be stacked together. They're part of different categories. But because they have the same module cost and the regular increased defense is far cheaper and provides a lot more increased defense in general, we just use this. Dimension Master and Focus on Dimension are our two main modules that increase the Massacre flat damage. These provide skill power, dimension skill power, and also a little bit of skill cooldown as well. They just have really high efficacy. I also tested with non-attribute because Massacre also scales off of non-attribute, and these just did more overall for the damage of the on-hit effect. HP Collector, weird choice. It's a fan favorite of a lot of people on a lot of Descendants. And the thing about HP Collector is, since we use HP in order to cast our skills, it's very easy to run low on HP or enter lethal range without even getting hit by the boss if you're regularly doing your burst. And so HP Collector, it allows Gley a way to actually get back some of the health. And the crazy thing is, HP Collector's 9% is not reduced by 50% by Gley's Frenzy. And so you have a really reliable way to recover health in between bursts, as opposed to just getting whittled down. So because it has an internal cooldown of 2 seconds, you should be very conscientious when you're killing ads with this. You should kill an ad, just kind of mentally clock 2 seconds, then kill another ad, and then just repeat so you can maximize the amount of health that you're recovering. And you should never really run into any trouble if you have this leveled up. Walk a Tightrope, very interesting choice, but we do often push into sub 50% territory when doing our burst because Massacre, along with increased sensory, drains 20% of your max HP. And what this does is it gives you skill power modifier and firearm attack, both things which we utilize when your HP drops under 50%. Quite easy to do. As long as you're under 70% already when you're doing your burst, you're going to enter Walk a Tightrope. This is one of the last mods that I would include in general in your list. And so if you're struggling on modular capacity, this one definitely set it aside and take it up later. An outstanding investment, this one just gives you just skill duration. Skill duration is just useful in general. It extends increased sensory. Skill extension, same thing. This one increases skill duration by a very large amount without any penalty, which is why we're not using the other module, because we lose skill power for using it. And lastly, increased HP because it stacks with Battle of Stamina. You can see that these modules have categories at the bottom of them. If you have another module that already has this category, they don't stack together. So for example, Focus on Dimension does not stack with Dimension Specialist because they're both under the attack category. On the other hand, Dimension Master and Focus on Dimension do stack together because one is in the battle category and one is in the attack category. If you are just focusing on damage, I would highly recommend you just focus on Dimension Master, Focus on Dimension, and anything duration related, and just kind of push up your HP and defense related modules along the way. There's only one defense related module listed here, and that's because we're going to be relying mainly on the external modules in order to beef up our survivability. So again, an HP module here, an HP module there, and then one defense module, and then we're sustaining from HP Collector, so we can make as much room as we possibly can for CDR, as well as skill duration and modifiers to Massacre. So for the weapon choices, we have 3 weapon slots. I'm going to go over the least important one, which is the third weapon. I have a shotgun here, but that's just to activate my phase reactor. I don't actually use it pretty much at all. For your 2 weapon choices, I use a weapon called the Blue Blood Bloomer. And this weapon has an insanely high fire rate. Its base fire rate is 999. With fire rate modifiers, we bring this up to 1,333. Its damage per shot is pretty low, but because it shoots so fast, it's great for 2 things: building stacks of mental focus, which helps bridge the gap between this SMG and other weapon choices that are good for this build, but also for proccing Massacre as much as possible, as well as other on-hit effects, such as elemental damage. Once again, everything is modulated here, or formatted. I spent many hours grinding to do this, as well as, well, just buying the format off the cash shop. But we're going to go over the important things and the unimportant thing. Everything here has an impact on your damage. And the most unique thing in here is a special one called mental focus. And mental focus, the way this works is every time you shoot your firearm, it doesn't even have to hit anything. As long as you're shooting it, you gain a stack. And this stack increases your firearm attack by 1%. So if you shoot 150 bullets, you're getting 150% firearm attack. And you can kind of see where this is going. If you have infinite ammo and you're shooting at 1,333 RPM, in a big burst window, you can actually build up all those stacks, and it's worth a lot more than rifle reinforcement, which we use anyways because it is non-categorized. But if my understanding is correct, because they both specify firearm attack, these mods are most likely additive, which means that the actual effect of rifling reinforcement on your overall damage as a whole is much less than 32%. And so this makes it actually a lower priority module once you have your whole setup done. Action and reaction, on the other hand, 61% firearm attack, just way more than rifling reinforcement, so much higher priority. The recoil is not an issue because generally when we're bursting, it's when the boss is in a groggy state. And so we don't really have to worry about recoil because we're right up next to the boss anyways. Concentration priority is extra critical hit damage. The native crit chance of the Blue Blood Bloomer is only 12%, which is very low. But because it has so much critical hit damage, it's generally worth just picking up just for the sake of, because there's just not that many better choices. The reload time modifier is normally a penalty, but because you don't have to reload during increased sensory, you don't have to worry about this affecting your burst at all. Better concentration, much like concentration priority, but worse. Fire rate up. Fire rate up, the more you shoot, the more you proc. This is one of the biggest increases in your damage overall. Weak point sight, because this is a separate multiplier. Weak point sight is actually very important. Since we can't really capitalize on crit as much, weak point damage is a way for us to increase the damage of the SMG by a new multiplier. And so we're going to be using a lot of weak point damage, and you see with have aiming we get more weak point damage, bringing the total multiplier up to 1.7. Again, accuracy not an issue when we're immediately next to the boss. The last two things I have is an element, and you're going to see that these have been formatted. I actually recommend against formatting these. I just did this for the sake of this video, just for fun, but what you really want to be able to do is you want to be able to switch elements based off of what you're fighting and use what's strong. And electric won't always be strong against everything. It's just coincidental that it's pretty good against most of the hard colossi in the current tier of endgame fights that we're doing, especially because Hard Devourer drops the set that Gley uses, and Hard Devourer is weak to lightning, so it's just convenient for farming. And I have electric priority here as well. Electric priority, again, reload time modifier penalty, but not an issue because we're not reloading during that. The electric attack plus 50% is a bit of a weird one, but because we get 30% of our firearm damage as electric attack, and we have electric attack that we rolled innately on the lines, this is actually doing a lot more work than it might sound, especially if the boss is weak to electricity and it's amplified. To my understanding, elemental damage does not get weak point bonus though, so just bear in mind that for weak point, you're mainly just benefiting from the raw firearm damage itself. Because the critical hit rate of the SMG is quite low, we can't really use critical rate. You could use critical rate in place of better concentration if you want. That actually might yield a little bit more damage. I think I can actually check right here if I hover this over. No, it says it's slightly less, but honestly, it might be slightly more. It's close enough where they're interchangeable, but yeah, there's just not a lot of better options here. But yeah, this is everything that will increase the damage as much as it can to a raw amount. Alternatives for the Blue Blood Bloomer, there are a lot. The Tamer, a very popular LMG, works fine for this. And for legendary SMGs, both are valid choices. The Thunder Cage is very, very good because it has high innate crit chance and good damage per bullet. And so if you're building the Thunder Cage and you want to use the Thunder Cage as your weapon, well, one, you've got your legendary weapon figured out for your legendary module when it becomes available to farm. And two, you're going to be building more around crit and crit damage with this SMG because it has a good chance to crit and it can benefit from that huge crit damage multiplier. The Python is another really great choice because the Python, while it has a very low innate crit chance of 5%, it has a very high fire rate. Now, it's been reported to me that the debuff, unfortunately, the non-attribute debuff doesn't actually work with Massacre, which is unfortunate. We only learned this this morning when someone got the weapon and was willing to test it for us. But the gun is still a fantastic gun. And at the end of the day, you need a legendary SMG at some point or another because a legendary SMG will be required in order to use, an ultimate reactor, which provides 20% more skill power. And speaking of the reactor, another very important component, there's only one, the materialized phase reactor. This is the only reactor in the game that will double benefit Massacre's damage as it provides non-attribute skill power boost ratio and dimension skill power boost ratio as well. Both of these impact Massacre. As for the sublines, there's quite a few choices. There's 4 choices. There's dimension skill power boost ratio. That's a good one. You're going to see that instead of listed as a percent, it's listed as a multiplier, but you should treat that as a 7.5% increase. There is non-attribute, which is also acceptable. Skill cooldown is okay. It's going to reduce that internal interval of the Blood and Iron class module. And skill duration, which is probably the best thing that you can get. So any of those 4 options, any 4 combination, if you get a combination of 2 of them, just keep it. That's good. It's hard enough. The RNG is pretty heavy on getting 2 of the correct lines on a reactor. And as far as the optimization condition goes, if you're using a purple reactor, it just has to be any of the 3 weapon types that you have equipped. You could have it for SMG, you could have it for shotgun, you could have it for sniper rifle. Again, your third slot doesn't really matter. You could really have it as anything. And with purple reactors, the condition is weapon class equipped. So as long as you have it equipped somewhere on you, it doesn't have to be out. So even though I have a shotgun, I could have my SMG out and still benefit from it. With a legendary reactor, though, the optimization condition changes to mounted, which means you actually have to have the actual weapon out. And so whatever ultimate weapon you have out is what you're going to be bursting with, because that's when you want the full effect of the reactor to take place. And that's why the ultimate options tend to be Python and Thunder Cage. I did miss the first weapon option. And for your first weapon option, you do have a lot of choices here as well. I use a hand cannon. Hand cannons allow me to be a little bit more accurate when targeting a boss part. But you could use Tamer here, really popular option. Just be mindful, it shares the same ammo type as SMGs, and so you might want to consider having an ammo conversion module somewhere on it. These are the modules that I use for my hand cannon. Again, just raw damage, but here's the thing with the hand cannon. The hand cannon, I have a lot of crit chance related mods on it, and hand cannons in general have high innate crit. And the reason why it's good to have a high crit weapon or a high crit chance weapon is because in order for Blood and Iron, your class module that allows you to get custom resources to proc in the first place, you need to crit. And then when you crit, it has a 30% chance to give you that resource. And so I pick a high crit chance weapon to fish for the crits and then switch to the SMG, and then that's how we burst. And so there's a lot of modules here related to crit and crit damage. Since it has high crit chance, it can benefit from that crit damage pretty well. And again, an elemental module too. And so I would say that if you do use a hand cannon, action and reaction, higher priority than rifling reinforcement, of course, because the raw number is significantly higher. Fire rate is good. The faster you shoot the bullets, the sooner you might get a crit that procs your Blood and Iron. Crit chance related things are also really important so that you have that extra chance as well. And so you might run into small issues if you decide to use like SMG plus Tamer, because both of those have pretty low crit chance. If you're using a Thunder Cage, then you can actually fish for the crits just using your SMG because of the natural high crit chance. Another great hand cannon option is the Assassin's Edge. The Assassin's Edge has a much higher innate crit chance, which makes it an appealing option if you just want more crit chance on each shot and higher opportunity on every shot that you fire. However, do note that the fire rate of them is much different. The Assassin's Edge has a much lower fire rate compared to the immediate execution. And that's not really that much of an issue when you're bossing, but I do find that when you're just, mobbing and whatnot, if you're not just using your SMG and you had to pull out your hand cannon for some reason, the overkill damage of a lower RPM, high damage hand cannon tends to be wasted, whereas being able to shoot faster tends to be a little bit more beneficial for general purposes. It doesn't really matter what you pick here. But so there's a lot of flexibility in terms of the weapon choices. I'm not going to show you the mods on the shotgun because it doesn't matter. We never use it in the first place. Now, the external components. These are the most important part of your defensive. You can see that I've got 42,000 defense and 15,000 or almost 16,000 HP. And just for a moment, I'd like you to remember those numbers as I take off my modules. And you see my defense falls down to 10,800 and 7,200 HP, which is a significant decrease. These modules make up almost all of your defensive in general, and that's because the defense and HP lines on these components are modified by the modules that you have equipped. So anywhere where there's HP on these, it's being modified by battle stamina and increased HP. Anywhere there's defense on these components is being increased by 160% in there. Might have misspoken, but it's components. So let's just put those back on. And for the component set, we use the Annihilation set. This set drops from Hard Devourer. Every time you kill Hard Devourer, he's guaranteed to drop 2 pieces of it. And you're looking for defense and HP. The first component and the third component can double roll what you need. So you can see I've got defense and max HP here. Both are beneficial to my survivability. And on the third one, the memory, we have max HP and defense, a gold line, which is ideal. That's a high roll. And both of those are benefiting as well. Apparently, for the second and fourth component, they cannot roll double, and so you'll just have one line on these. This is what I've been told. Don't know if this is actually true, but this set is very good. It gives us skill duration, which is going to increase the amount of time of increased sensory overall, prolonging your burst. And the 4-set bonus is very cool. The 4-set bonus will increase your damage depending on how much HP that you have lost. The lower your HP, the more firearm attack that you get. And because we're already playing around walk a tightrope, going under 50% HP, you're generally benefiting from a decent chunk of firearm attack from the Annihilation sensor set. Before you get this set, though, you can use any component that has HP or defense on it. Any of them will work. Like any will work as long as it has those lines, and it'll make you nice and tanky as you go through the story. A lot of people struggle with survivability on Gley because she has no shields and she tends to be in the fray more or less. So with this much defense and HP, you're really tanky, especially after you get HP Collector. If you get HP Collector early on, then it's great. You'll have sustain as you're going through the story as well. And you're going to notice I don't run a resistance module, and that's because between HP Collector and that much defense and HP, I don't need it for any of the current fights in the game. You can run a resistance module if you want, but there's not a lot of leeway to replace things. You could temporarily not use like something like Walk a Tightrope, which is very optional, but you don't really need it once you get comfortable with the fights, even though you toe the line between dying and living quite a bit. So next, what I'm going to talk about is Frenzy and how to abuse Frenzy. And there is a reason for that. The reason has to do with how much burst damage this build does. This is up there as one of the highest bursts in the game outside of, one-shot big attacks from something like that assassin Descendant, who I can't remember their name, or Blair's giant meatball attack. Outside of those gigantic burst single hits, this is one of the highest bursts. And because Frenzy is based off of damage dealt when you're hitting a boss, the more damage you do, the faster you're going to enrage the boss and put him into an immune state. And so in the next segment, we're going to be talking about frenzy management, and how to abuse frenzy so that you can do tons of burst damage and skip frenzy mechanics altogether from bosses. Let's take a moment to actually dissect what happened in this clip. I start off by aiming exclusively at the boss's shoulder to weaken it. Hitting tab to scan the boss highlights its weak points and displays the frenzy gauge underneath its HP bar in purple. Typically, when this bar fills, the boss becomes immune to damage and it becomes extra deadly. Have you ever noticed that some boss runs this seems to happen way more frequently than others? It's because of something called the groggy state. Groggy is a state used to describe when colossi have fallen over. This is an important time to attack because during this period, all damage dealt will not generate any frenzy. There are 3 ways to cause a boss to groggy. The first way is to grapple onto any part of the boss when the part becomes highlighted yellow, indicating you've done enough damage to grapple to it. Press LMB to smack the part, and within 1 attack of grappling on, the boss will try to shake you off. Hold right click to not get thrown off. Afterwards, resume smashing the shoulder until it breaks, forcing the boss to the ground. In this clip, I don't hold on since I did extra damage to the shoulder before grappling on so that it would break in a few smacks before he could shake me off. The second way is by making boss generate enough frenzy through gunfire or abilities. Bosses generate frenzy proportional to damage taken. The more damage you do, the more frenzy you build up. All weapons cause the same amount of frenzy when dealing the same amount of damage. Not sure about this? Take a newly crafted level 1 weapon to a hard mode boss, and you'll see that no matter how many bullets you shoot, it won't cause any frenzy buildup. Frenzy that the boss generates in an instant as a self buff to themselves through their unique mechanics, such as when someone is trapped in a cube in Obstructor's fight, or through hummingbird robots don't count towards this threshold, only through abilities and gunfire. The amount it takes isn't exactly well known or easy to test, but we usually guess it happens around every 40% of the frenzy bar in normal bosses and 80% or so in hard mode. The final way is by resolving a boss's gimmick sometimes. You can see in this clip that immediately after destroying Devourer's 3rd canister in his frenzy mech, he immediately goes down into the groggy state. After grappling apart, you cannot re-grapple the boss again for 30 seconds. However, it's possible to chain groggy back to back if you grapple apart right after a groggy state just happened because of a mechanic resolving or from damage frenzy buildup. Also worth noting is if you destroy the shoulders or the chest cover through gunfire, it'll just momentarily stagger the boss, but it will not put them in the groggy state. Another cool strategy that you can consider is after destroying one shoulder, leaving the other shoulder up and intact by simply grappling it but not smashing it and just holding on like a bucking bronco rodeo. By doing this, you're leaving a target that you could re-grapple every 30 seconds after the cooldown has elapsed, and you can tell this by the white highlight turning back to yellow. Since frenzy buildup from damage stops immediately as soon as someone is grappled onto the boss, this gives you and your team a way to repeatedly get a huge damage window on the boss where they're not really fighting back without building up any dangerous frenzy. Understanding this mechanic can sometimes be very useful It can allow you to plan out your attack strategy so that you can avoid frenzy mechanics, finishing a fight sooner or more safely. This is especially important as Gley, since your high burst damage can grief your fire team if you attack haphazardly. I really hope this collection of information ends up being helpful to some of you guys to better understand some of the nuances of the first Descent. I'll be gone from the game for a while since I am primarily an MMORPG content creator, and I'll be busy covering Lost Ark's major Season 3 update. But hopefully when the dust settles, I'll be able to revisit TFD and make that Blair build I always wanted. So until then, I'll see you guys next time and hope you guys the best of luck and good RNG in your grind.